2020 has been quite a difficult year. Some would say it's been one of the most difficult years in our lifetime. In the UK, we've had to grapple with two major issues. One was, of course, COVID-19, the pandemic, and deaths, unfortunately, now are way above 72,000, a phenomenal number that haunts me every time I cite it. And also Brexit, this stab at nationalism that has overtaken our country. Further away from the UK and the British Isles, I've also been quite affected by the 6-week war in Nagorno-Karabakh in the Southern Caucasus. After all, as an Armenian, I trace my spiritual background to Armenia, my spiritual background, not my physical or real background. And therefore, what happened there affected me, perturbed me, and it's been a difficult pill to swallow as well. But today, 31 December 2020, I'm not going to focus on the United Kingdom. I'm not going to focus on the Southern Caucasus. I'm going to talk about a region I probably know a little bit more about, and that is the Middle East, North Africa, and Gulf regions. So welcome to this end of year, the very end of year episode on YouTube of Intuitive Reactions, the MENA and Gulf regions. And this one is number 23. Now, if I start with a very, very broad brush stroke, and I say, okay, in the MENA and Gulf regions, who were the winners, who were the losers, and who were the people who were playing the political game rather well, I would say that the winners, in my opinion, personally, are Russia and Turkey. And the irony of it all is that Russia and Turkey have grown closer together despite the very many differences separating them. They're cooperating well together. And I'm not only talking about missiles, I'm talking about the Caucasus now, I'm talking about Libya, I'm talking about Syria, I'm even talking about other parts of the world. Yet the irony for me is that those two are, in my opinion, the winners, despite the fact that their economies are doddering, are weak. If you just have a look at the economies of Russia and Turkey, you would realize the parlous state in which both those economies are. However, both are very strong militarily. The Russian Federation, it goes without saying, it's been a nuclear superpower during the Cold War, before the Cold War, and after the Cold War. And Turkey is also probably the second most powerful military country within NATO. The losers, on the other hand, in my opinion, have been the USA, as evidenced during the last decade. And we could see traces of that during the Obama administration, and certainly during the Trump's monochromatic obsession with Iran and his political shenanigans in the region. Shenanigans basically meaning, let's not be political, let's not be consensual, let's not be multilateral, let's just be transactional, let's support dictators who give us lots of money, and first and foremost, let's make sure Israel reigns supreme over everybody and the Palestinians are pretty much squelched into a little box in the corner. So the US is, in my opinion, still, despite those symptoms, a loser, as is Europe, whose influence post-colonial influence, if you want, has dwindled, has receded comparably to 10, 20 years ago. Look at the United Kingdom where we are. Look at France. I mean, we with our Brexit, France with Macron's efforts to try and project French hard power, which is not really working very well. Then also let me add Iran, that itself has also been crippled economically, largely due to US sanctions, but it has managed nonetheless to maintain its outreach and influence. Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Gaza. The question, of course, now in my mind is not whether there will be a war next week in the Gulf region. A lot of people are talking about B-52 bombers, they're talking about nuclear submarines crossing the Suez Canal quite openly from Israel. All that to one side, I think the question in my mind is whether the JCPOA, the non-nuclear agreement with Iran, and the P5 at the time that was basically rubbished by the Trump administration will be tweaked, will be extended during the Biden presidency after the 20th of January. As for China, itself also, in my opinion, on the winning side, its foreign policies, forget the economy at the moment, forget that it is the biggest economic challenge to the United States and will probably gain parity within the next few years. I'm looking at the foreign policies, and the foreign policy of Iran and its leadership politically remind me very much of their proverb that a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. In other words, slowly but surely, China is making inroads in Africa, in Asia, in the Gulf, in the Levant, across many parts of the world, including, by the way, in Europe as well. But let me leave the broad brush strokes and make a few quick and blunt reminders, a rundown if you want, food for thought, hints only, across some of the MENA and Gulf countries as well. The first big statement I will make is that the whole MENA and Gulf region is caught up, particularly the MENA region, is caught up in this sort of tug of war, standoff between the first and second waves of revolutionary uprisings, 2010, 2020. Only a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about the 10th anniversary of the so-called Arab Spring at the time. James Abbott and I did quite a long audio conversation on it on Middle East Analysis, our flagship, but also the second wave of uprisings, of revolutionary uprisings, which included countries like Sudan, like Algeria, and like Lebanon. But those revolutionary uprisings, the tug of war is that those uprisings are being countered by very strong counter-revolutionary forces. Some of them flush with money, others with geopolitical influence that have tried to put a stop to the aspirations of ordinary people, because such uprisings actually upset the balance of power, remove some of those people from their vested power bases, and makes the region a little bit more representative, more open, more citizenship friendly. And these are things that the rulers of most of those countries, not all, do not like. They're allergic to this. It's the my way or highway that still prevails quite strongly in the mentality of those strong, many of them coming from military backgrounds, those strong rulers in the region. But then let me pick, not cherry pick, but let me pick a few of those countries across 2020. Palestine, in a parlous state, in a very bad shape. The Palestinian conflict is now very, very much secondary in the political imagination of many, many countries across the world. Palestine has lost its third world or developing world friends, largely due to the ineptitude of its own leaderships in the plural. Palestine has also even now lost the support of the EU, its staunch supporter and ally, because the EU is so much caught up with its own COVID pandemic, with its own Brexit shenanigans, with its own internecine struggles as well. And therefore, and America, of course, America, Trump's motto has been squelch, disinvest Palestinians of their right for self-determination and for a sovereign state, give everything to Israel and let me make Israel happy and then I'm happy. I know. I'm sort of leapfrogging, I'm making big statements. These are hints. You can do your own research. Then, of course, there is Syria. Syria now, it seems to me that President Bashar al-Assad is pretty much in control of the country. The question is now, what will happen with the constitution? We can see the endless meetings that are taking place in Geneva, which are taking us nowhere. We can see the fact that Bashar al-Assad is managing to play Russia against Iran in terms of zones of influence in the country and stay strong. And of course, Bashar al-Assad now can claim that with his mom having died, he can claim that now the first lady in real power terms is Asma, his wife, who has basically pushed to one side his cousin Rami Makhlouf and is now pretty much becoming the wheeler and dealer in the country. But the question with Syria is construction. When and how will reconstruction of a damaged country begin, and who will fund it, and what will be the levers of influence once that reconstruction starts? Iraq, I don't really need to say much about Iraq. You can see what's happening in Iraq. It's a tug of war. America on the one side, Iran on the other side, pulling in different directions. Every now and then a missile goes toward the green zone. And of course, caught up in the middle of all this is the central government of Baghdad. At the moment, the prime minister, and they have changed quite considerably, the prime minister at the moment, Kazemi, is trying to do his best to basically keep on good terms with both sides so that Iraq, which has seen some resurgence of terrorist activities, which saw a movement, a populist movement asking for dignity and democracy, but that has gone down. And in a previous Intuitive Reactions YouTube episode I did with the wonderful Maya Jubaili, who is a correspondent for Agence France Presse and lives in Baghdad, I asked her, do you see hope in Iraq? And her wry answer was, to be honest, I don't. That is sad. Lebanon? Well, Lebanon is in a mess. Economically, it's in meltdown. It's already melted down. And the various political and sectarian powers in the country are doing their best to stay in power despite all the evidence showing that their obduracy, their own interests are basically leading the country, which suffered that horrendous port explosion, leading the country into the abyss. Yet they seem to say, après moi le déluge, or Rome burns while Nero fiddles on the roof. And that is basically what I see at the moment happening with Lebanon. And Macron's attempts, President Macron's attempts of trying to be the mediator, I wonder if he's bet on the wrong horse for this one. Egypt, well, Egypt, strong military president, no freedoms at all, trying to keep the country firmly under the lid. Human rights, what human rights? Jails full of people who disagree with the president and the leadership of Egypt. Where will it go? It depends on the geopolitics of the region, and it depends on what happens with Egypt's supporters. Remember the hoo-ha that ensued when President Sisi visited France a few weeks ago. Yemen, an absolute disaster brought about by a stupid, destructive war. And I'll only give you one little thing. You can check it on Google or on your news, telegraph or whatever. The blast at Aden airport a couple of days ago, when the new so-called cabinet was returning home to try and find some solution to the country. The country is divided, hopelessly divided, with people using force and brutal force as if they don't care. And a civilization, a beautiful civilization with a very inclusive, wonderful people are the victims, the scapegoats of those mediocre but destructive policies. In the Maghreb, in North Africa, let me basically say that Morocco, the recent focus is on the Sahara, the Western Sahara, that President Trump recognized as being Moroccan in its sovereignty. Where will that lead in relations with Algeria? How will it move forward? What will the Polisario do, etc., etc. And in that case, as far as the Sahara is concerned, I will add in the description box a link. It's around 50 minutes long. It's a YouTube by France24 Arabic. So if you understand Arabic, watch it. It gives a very good cover of the Sahara, Western Sahara conflict, and it's got 4 guests who give their opinions. Algeria, the movement, the Iraq has also stopped there. And the president has just come back from treatment in Germany. He looks very frail. There's a power play happening in Algiers as well. The question is, what will happen there? As far as the Gulf are concerned, there are 2 issues alone that I would highlight. The first issue is, of course, the spat. And I really call it a spat because I find it so stupid that has happened between Qatar on the one hand, and then the United Arab Emirates, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and Bahrain on the other. And it started because those 3 decided to give an ultimatum to Qatar: our way or the highway. You do it our way or you're out. And Qatar chose the way out, remodeled its economy, its reliance on other neighbors, and managed to survive this sort of silly embargo or boycott, choose whichever word suits you better, against it. Of course, why am I sad? I'm not Qatari, I'm not a Gulf person, I'm not an Arab. The reason I'm sad is because I don't like people being bullied. It's almost like my neighbor here, Kyle, telling me, you know what, Harry, I don't like your religious views, I don't like your political views, I don't like the people you support, therefore you either change them or I'm going to create a zone around you, to boycott you, to isolate you from the rest of the world. Hey, okay, this is a minor personal story, but it impacts on the larger principle applied by those 3 GCC countries. And in the process, the only functional Arab organization was the GCC. The Arab League is somnolent, has been for long times. That has been weakened considerably as well. So all the efforts we see now toward trying to find a solution, a reconciliation. There's going to be a GCC summit in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia next week. If the Emir of Qatar attends, if all 6 rulers of the GCC come together in order to not get reconciled, but start the process of reconciliation, maybe opening their airspaces to Qatar, their land movements to Qatar, attempts at confidence building measures that would perhaps bring the GCC together. Of course, the Trump administration wants that because it wants a solid camp against Iran. But I'm not thinking in terms of Iran. I'm thinking in terms of the future of the Gulf region and the Arabs who are largely tribal in that whole area, and people are interrelated, intermixed, intermarried. The future of the region. But if reconciliation there is going to be, and if there is any advice I would dare give, it shouldn't be at the expense of Qatari sovereignty. That's, in my opinion, quite clear to the political leadership in the country, and it's quite clear to any sensible person that 3 GCC countries cannot dictate the policies of another fellow neighbor or GCC country. In fact, recently, a couple of months ago, was it, whenever the Saudi foreign minister suggested that a final agreement with Qatar was within reach. He also said that Saudi Arabia wanted to work with Biden on Yemen, that assassinations are not the route to peace. Assassinations, yes, Khashoggi is one of them. Normalization with Israel only if it produces a Palestinian state on the basis of the 2002 Arab Initiative. And he said he had faith in the courts to handle women activists. I could spend an hour dissecting those statements that were made by the Saudi foreign minister. I won't. I'll leave it for you. These are hints that you can follow on. The picture I've painted rather hurriedly, and you see I'm running out of breath because I was trying to put everything in there before I lose the ability to upload this episode. The region is in a bad shape. Anybody can see that, even if you do not follow the region, even if you're not a so-called pundit or expert or observer or journalist or politician. But there is always hope. Normalization, I didn't talk about normalization too much, but normalization is a sovereign right of every Gulf country, any country, Sudan, Morocco, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, to normalize relations with Israel. But normalization from what to what? And not normalization that is distasteful as well. Like, I don't want to go there. I'll stop here on that. I've spoken a lot. You can go to my previous 10 episodes on the intuitive reactions of the MENA and Gulf region, and you can find a lot of food for thought there. But one thing I would like to say, I have not, despite all these negative things, despite the so-called temporary defeat of the revolutionary uprising, despite the difficulties, economic, political, social, religious, etc., of the whole region, the Levant, the Gulf, the Maghreb, I am still hopeful. I think there is a movement that started some 2 decades ago, gradually grew, and is still there, even though now, due to economics and COVID-19, it has subsided a little bit. I think there is hope. And I will end on that note of hope at the end of 2020 for the coming year, 2021, and the coming decade until 2030. And I will do it not in my own words, but I will conclude by quoting the famous Syrian playwright Saadallah Wannous. What did he say? He said, "We are condemned to hope." The question, of course, what else does the MENA and Gulf region have? We are condemned to hope. I wish you all a hopeful 2021, both in terms of COVID, in terms of politics, in terms of international relations. And maybe we will rediscover slowly our interdependence, our multilateralism, our community as a globe, rather than our own self-centered interests again. And that applies to politics, it applies to personal relations too. Take care and all the best.